My first Hello World experience was at a game jam. This is when I was first introduced to Unity and wrote my first line of C# code. It was an amazing experience to see something working on screen the way that you expected.
I did that final edit to my code and I said, I think this is what's gonna work. It should be fine. And I went to play mode. I hit that play button in Unity and everything opened up and worked magically. It was so good. It was so rewarding.
The time when I wrote my
Everything opened up and worked magically. I can't get over that feeling. It was so good. It was so rewarding.
The time when I wrote my first code to draw a triangle in my computer graphics class, and that's the hello world of graphics. It was the most satisfying thing when at the end you were able to see a triangle being drawn.
I typed in some code and it did exactly what I told it to do. That was cool, I guess, but the next assignment we had was to procedurally generate a dungeon. That was the moment I fell in love with programming, when I could write some code and I didn't even know what would come out of it.
Welcome to this official course from Unity, where you will learn to create with code. My name's Carl, and I'll be your instructor, teaching, guiding, and challenging you every step of the way. I studied computer science and game development, and have been helping students create with technology for almost 10 years. And I am so excited to help you learn to code and achieve your goals. So what is the goal of this course? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's for you to learn to code and create with Unity. That means it's not a history of programming course. It's not a theoretical course. It's a practical course to give you the foundation you need to be able to program whatever you want with Unity. With Unity, you can build applications for mobile, like iOS and Android, platforms like Windows and Mac, consoles like PlayStation and Xbox, VR and AR devices like Oculus and Google Cardboard, and a lot more. Think about it. Every app on your phone, every program on your computer, all the technology you interact with on a daily basis was made with code. And if you learn to create with code, you can help to build that technology instead of just using it. I'll be teaching you how to code in C#, one of the most popular and powerful programming languages in the world. So, as you are learning to create with code, you'll be doing so with Unity and C#, both in-demand, industry-standard skill sets. Now let's get into the details. How are you going to learn all of this? Throughout the course, we'll create 5 distinct prototypes together, coding every single line of C# from scratch. In each one of these prototypes, you'll learn critical new concepts, expanding and reinforcing your skill set with each new feature you add. After completing each prototype, I'll present you with a skill testing programming challenge and quiz where you can prove that you're ready to move on. And finally, throughout the course, you will also work on your own personal project that is completely and uniquely your own. You'll have lab time to come up with a design and concept for your project, plan it out, and build it. So by the end of this course, not only will you theoretically know how to create whatever you want with code, you'll have already done it. At the end of this course, you'll also be ready to take on the Unity Certified User Programmer exam. That's Unity's official stamp of approval, certifying that you know what you're doing. In this course, you will combine the knowledge of coding in C# with building in Unity, and in doing so, you will be able to create interactive, dynamic digital experiences. You can use these skills for game development, animation, storytelling, architecture, engineering, you name it. The sky's the limit. So let's start creating. Before you get started working on the course, there's something really important I have to tell you about how you should take this course. Even though it's just one little piece of advice I'm sharing here, it's so important that we made this entire video to tell you about it. So without further ado, here are the 3 most important words you'll need to know to succeed in this course. Watch, then do. This course is made up of a ton of videos that you will watch, where I'm showing you how to do cool stuff in Unity. But while the video's playing, just watch it. Then, after the video ends, you'll have the opportunity to do it yourself. Watch, then do. If you try to do what I'm doing while you're watching it, it'll be very difficult for 2 reasons. It'll be incredibly frustrating for you. You'll have to keep switching back and forth between the video and your project, not knowing when to pause, having to rewind all the time, being confused because you missed something, and basically just being super annoyed overall. And 2, in trying to do what I'm doing while I'm doing it, you won't actually process or retain any information, since you'll be furiously clicking around where I click without understanding the broader context. After every video, there are step-by-step instructions outlining exactly what you need to do. So watch, then do. I'm telling you, in these early lessons especially, it's going to be tempting to ignore this advice. But you have to trust me on this. You'll get so much more out of this course and enjoy it so much more if you watch, then do. 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 Okay? I'm pretty sure you get the idea, so let's do it. Welcome to the very first unit of this course, where you will begin your journey creating with code. In this unit, we will create a driving simulator prototype where the user can steer a vehicle down a road to avoid obstacles in its path, or crash into them if that's more their liking. As you create this prototype, you will learn the programming fundamentals to implement player control. That is giving the player the ability to control an object in the world you've created. To accomplish this, you'll have to take some input from the player. Maybe they're pressing the arrow keys, using the mouse or a joystick, and translate that into some action in the 3D environment. I probably don't have to explain to you how important player control is. Pretty much every game or interactive experience ever made gives the player control over something in the environment. Otherwise, the player wouldn't have much to do. So whether you're floating a balloon up and down in the air from a side view, moving a character side to side from a top-down view, or rolling a ball around from a third-person view, all of these draw on the same foundational programming techniques. So you'll be able to take this element of player control and apply it to your own projects in all kinds of interesting ways. So let's start creating.
let's get started creating our very first Unity project. Now remember to watch me before you do this yourself. Now up first, just for some organization, I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop where I'm going to be saving my Create with Code project. So if I right click on the desktop, I'm going to select New and create a new folder. Then I'm going to rename this folder Create with Code Carl D. That way I know that this is where all my projects are going to go. So if I press Enter, now I have a folder on my desktop where I'm going to be saving all of my Create with Code projects. The next thing I'm going to do is create a new empty project called Prototype 1 on the correct version of Unity through Unity Hub. However, since Unity Hub is changing all the time, we want to make sure you have the most up-to-date instructions. So I'm not going to demonstrate that in the video. Instead, I want you to very carefully follow the instructions below to create your project. So just make sure when this video is over, you follow the instructions below the video to make your project. I'm just going to skip forward when the project is already made. And here you can see my new Unity project for Prototype 1. And you can see here the Unity interface. Now, if this is your first time seeing it, it may be a little intimidating with all of the different windows and buttons. But don't worry, we'll go through it in detail very soon. So for now, this is where I'll stop and let you create your own Unity project. Make sure to follow the steps below to create a folder to save all of your Unity projects, and then create your very first Unity project through Unity Hub. Now that we've created our first Unity project, let's start getting our scene set up by importing the project library. Now remember, watch me before you do this yourself. In order to download our project files to get started, we'll need to use the download link in the instructions below this video. If I click on that link, it will download a zip of the starter files right onto my computer. So let's see where I saved those files. On my desktop, where I created that new Create with Code folder for my projects, you can see here I've already downloaded the project library for Prototype 1. So all I need to do is extract this folder to get the assets I'm going to use for my project. So I'm just going to right click on Prototype 1, extract all, and then it's going to select a location, which in this case is the folder that I'm already working in. So I'm going to extract, and you can see that it extracted pretty quickly. And if I go into this new Prototype 1 direct download folder, you can see here that I have the Prototype 1 starter files, and it's of type Unity package file. So this is what I'm going to use to import into my project to get set up. If I head into Unity, I'm going to go to the Assets button on my menu, go to Import Package, and then Custom Package. Now I need to find that Unity package file that I just extracted. So I'm going to go to that Create with Code folder on my desktop, go down into the Prototype 1 direct download folder, and find the Prototype 1 starter files, select it, and open it. you can see that Unity prompts you with a new window asking you if you want to import all of these different files. And we're going to need all of these for our project, so I'm going to import at the bottom of the window. Now let me show you what Unity just did. So if I get started in Unity, down in the project window down here, you can see that there's an assets folder that has a course library folder and a scenes folder. So the course library folder is what was just added into our project. And if I click into this folder, you can see that there are some additional folders for some of the props and objects that are going to be in our scene when we get started. So for example, I could go to the obstacles folder, and you can see here a list of different obstacles. You can actually use this little slider at the bottom of the project window if you want to actually see what the models of the project. And if I click into when we get started. So for example, I could go to the obstacles folder, and you can see here a list of different obstacles. You can actually use this little slider at the bottom of the project window if you want to actually see what the models of those objects look like. So now you can see we have all these different props that we can use in our scene, like a rock or a barrier or a traffic cone. Now I'm going to show you what this actually looks like inside of Unity. So if I go back to my assets folder by selecting it on the left-hand side of the project window, I'm going to go into the scenes folder, and inside of my scenes folder, I have a sample scene, which is actually what's currently open right now, which has nothing inside of it. Or I can open up this prototype 1 scene by double clicking on it. And now inside of this prototype 1 scene, you can see that it pops up inside of this scene window here in the center of Unity. And if I just use my mouse while it's hovering over this scene window, right click and hold, I can actually move the camera that's in the scene view to see around this virtual world that we've created for you. So you can see here we have this long road. We have some of those mountains in the background. We have a pretty cool sky with stars in it. And so this will be the scene that we'll start building our first Unity project in. Now, since this will be our main scene, we actually don't need this sample scene anymore. So I'm just going to right click on sample scene and then delete it and delete the selected asset. So now the only thing that's in my Unity project is that prototype 1 scene. So what you're going to do is download the starter files for the project by using the link in the instructions below this video. And then you're going to extract that zipped folder that we gave you. And you can double check to make sure that inside of that folder are the prototype 1 starter files. Once you've unzipped those starter files, you're going to head back into Unity, go to the Assets button in the top menu, go to Import Package, and import a custom package. From there, you're going to find the folder where you extracted those starter files. So in my case, on my Create with Code Carl D folder on my desktop. And you're going to find the prototype 1 starter files Unity package file. So you're going to select it and then open it. You'll then be prompted with an import window. So in my case, since I already imported these assets, I don't have to worry about it, but you'll see a long list of different files. And at the bottom right of the window, you're going to click import. And that might take a few minutes. Once you've done that, you can head over to the project window down in the bottom of Unity, select the assets folder and go into your scenes folder. You're going to double click on prototype 1 to open it inside of your project. And then you can just right click and delete the sample scene because we won't be using it. And then if you want to explore the virtual world that we've created, you can just hover your mouse over the scene view here, right click and hold the right mouse button, and then you can move your mouse to move your camera in this virtual world. So now it's your turn. So now that we've added in the starter assets for our project, we're gonna go and add a vehicle into our scene. Make sure to watch me do this before you try it yourself. And just as a heads up, from here on out in these videos, I'll be using an older version of Unity. As you can see, the icons look slightly different, but otherwise everything is gonna work pretty much the same. What I'm gonna do is in the main section of our project window, I'm going to double click on vehicles. And that'll open up that folder, and that'll show us all of the different vehicles that we can use in our scene. I like the red truck over here. I think it looks really cool. So I'm going to left click on that vehicle, drag it into our hierarchy on the left side of Unity. When I let go, you can see that our vehicle has now been added into this large area in the center called our scene view. So all of our assets in our assets folder are what we use to populate our scene with different objects like our trucks. If we wanted to add some cool environmental props, maybe some boxes or trees, mountains, whatever we want to add, that's all stored in our assets folders, and then we can drag and drop them into our hierarchy to add them to our scene. Now, the hierarchy actually keeps track of all of the different objects that are currently there. So we have our camera, we have a light, we have some environment, and then we have our vehicle that we just added. Now, to really see our vehicle and experience the scene view that allows us to visualize everything that's happening in our game, what you can do is hover over the scene view with your mouse. If you hold the right mouse button, right click, and then you can actually move using the W, A, S, and D keys on your keyboard. So if I press W, I can zoom in. If I press S, I actually fly backwards. If I press A, I fly to the left. If I press D, I fly to the right. So you can use all of these in tandem, and you can actually move your mouse while you're flying around, so you can see all around your scene. Now, I have a problem here. I've gotten myself lost. I actually don't know where I am. I can see these nice mountains, though. So, in your hierarchy, if you make sure that your vehicle, your truck is selected, which is our truck, with my mouse now hovering over our scene view, if I press the F key on our keyboard, this will actually focus or frame back in our object that we have selected in our hierarchy. So that's super helpful. Another thing that we can do if we just want to get a 360-degree view, if we want to see all around this truck, we can actually hold down the Alt key on our keyboard. And then with our left click, if we drag to the left or to the right, we can actually rotate around. And what this is actually doing is it's rotating around the center point of our screen, which in this case is our vehicle, because we use our F key to focus on it. So now we can see all around our truck. And then another helpful thing that we can do is if we press the Alt key down and hold it again, we can actually use our right mouse button. And if we click and drag that, if we go to the left, we actually zoom out. In this case is our vehicle. To the left, we actually zoom out. Press the Alt key down and hold it again. We can actually use our shortcut when I was just trying to navigate around the scene. I can press Control Z or Command Z, and that will undo my moves and it will set it backwards. Grab one of your vehicles out of the course library, whichever one you want, left move your cursor into the hierarchy, and then you for the mouse, bring it to the right, get it closer. The easier it will be to move around your. So get very comfortable. folder and double click. And you can see here we have all of these different options that we can select from. I'm going to choose this crate because our truck actually has some boxes on it, so it looks kind of similar. So this time I'm going to left click and drag our crate, but instead of going into the hierarchy, I'm going to drag it directly into our scene view, and you can see that it's actually updating to here on our box. So currently we have our move tool selected. You can actually see which tools we currently have selected in the top left. We'll go through some of the other ones in a bit. With our move tool, you can see the up arrow. So in fact, if I left click and drag on this green arrow, you can see over on the right side in our inspector, the Y position changes. If I want to undo what I just did, I can use Control or Command Z. You can do the same thing with the X, which in this case is this red arrow. And I'll undo that with Control or Command Z. And with the blue arrow, this is RZ. So I'll undo that. So I'm going to reposition this crate, and I can do this one of two ways. I can either do it by going to that would take a really long time, and I don't want to do that. So in our transform, you can actually see all the way on the right side of our component, there's this little gear icon. If you're using a new version of Unity, it will actually be 3 little dots instead of a gear. So if I left click on the gear icon, you can see that there are different options, and one of the options is reset position. So if I left click that, now our positions are set to 0, 0, 0. And so now what I can do is if I want to move our box now that everything's at 0, now I'm going to do this the easy way where I can just type in the values in our inspector. So I want this to be a good distance away, and it would be a lot of work to just drag it with our move tool. So instead, I'm just going to go into the inspector on the right side. In our transform position, I'm going to select the Z text. If I click on it, you can see that now it highlights that text, and I can just type in 25. And it automatically moves my box 25 units in front of our. Click on the crate, I can rename. There's a rename option. I left click that. Now I can type in any inspector on the right side. If you see it, or vehicle, if you can see all you've done that, select your In fact, if I get a lens of our player and understand their perspective. So we can actually do that using our camera. If you go to the hierarchy on the left side of Unity, select your main camera by clicking on it, you can see that now we have the camera selected. This very large rectangle pops up, and on the bottom right, we can actually see our camera preview. In fact, if I deselect the camera, the preview goes away, and if I select the camera again, the preview comes back. So the preview is actually what we can see of what the player will see in our game. And in fact, that preview is entirely mapped to this huge rectangle that we can see in our scene. And so this is very helpful to see and understand what the player sees. Our camera actually controls what we see in our game view. So, in fact, if I go to the top of Unity and I press the play button, you can see that our scene view changes to this view here, which is our game view. In fact, in the center, the two tabs are side by side right next to each other. So, in our game view, you can see that if I try and click on our vehicle here, nothing will happen. I can still select the vehicle in the hierarchy, however, nothing changes here. Versus if I go to my scene, you can see that our vehicle's back there. If I select the move tool, I can move our vehicle again. And then in the game view, you can see that our vehicle actually moved a little bit. So maybe if I go in the transform component, if I press like 5. Okay, cool. So the vehicle is moving. That's interesting. Now, the one thing about play mode is, so this is how we test how our different objects interact in our world, how our player can, for example, control our vehicle. Since I made are different, so I stop and then I press play again, is really helpful. So when position, you're going to camera, and then if you want to go into your play mode, you can press the play button, and it'll go into your hierarchy, select exit. Camera, and in the top left you can see all of the different tools. Now I'm going to do the same thing. Instead of using our transform component on the right side, we're going to make sure we select our camera, and in the top left you can see all of the different tools that we have. So for now we're going to make sure that we have our move tool selected. It's those 4 arrows in those 4 different directions. So remember, control and hold and then left click on the red arrow. And so we can move our camera on the x-axis here, and I want to get it to 0. Cool. And now I'm going to keep my mouse cursor in our scene view, and I'm going to press F to focus so I can shift the perspective again back onto our camera. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this blue arrow so I can move our camera behind our vehicle. So if I left click and press and hold our control key, I can move our camera back somewhere to around, say, there. And then the same thing with our Y. I will press the control key and hold and left click and drag. So we'll put it with our rotate tool. So if you go to the top left of the tool is selected, and now in fact, you can see all of the different arrows have turned into lines, but these lines are actually well aligned to all of the different axes that we were playing around with before. So the X, the Y, and the Z. Now, to make it a little bit easier for us, I'm actually going to go to the top right of our scene view, and you can see this handy little gizmo over here with all of the different arrows. In fact, if I click on this green Y arrow here, you can see our perspective actually shifts to a top-down view from what we would see on the Y. And so I'm going to reposition back over the camera. So now I can very clearly see this green line. These lines are actually well aligned to all of the different axes that we were playing around with before. So the X, the Y, and the Z. Now, to make it a little bit easier for us, I'm actually going to go to the top right of our scene view, and you can see this handy little gizmo over here with all of the different arrows. In fact, I want to get a better perspective on our car. You can see it's not entirely in frame. So in terms of other tools that you can use, the X, so I'm going to go to the side view, click that. There you go, better. So now we can see the Z axis. So this will actually rotate our camera up and down. If I click and hold on this, I can drag it down a little bit, and now we have a really good view of our vehicle. In terms of other tools that you can use to make it easier, so on the top left with all of our different tools, we have all the way on the left-hand side our hand tool. So in fact, if we select our hand tool and we left-click and drag around our scene view, you can see actually this is very similar to just moving our scene view camera or scene view perspective. The tool next to it that we were playing around with, that's our move tool, so we can move. The tool next to that is our rotate tool, which we use to rotate our camera on a camera. But if we were to select our arrows, The tool next to that is our rotate tool, which we use to rotate our camera, is our rect tool, larger if we wanted to. The tool or our vehicle wouldn't really do anything because we're on a camera, but if we were to select our obstacle or our vehicle, we could make our vehicle larger if we wanted to. The tool next to that is our rect tool. So this actually combines the move, rotate, and scale tool all in one tool. However, this is only very useful for 2D. In fact, if I select the vehicle, you can get a better view. There's this kind of rectangular outline around our vehicle. So useful for 2D. In this case, we have a 3D world, so that doesn't really help. If we select the last tool all the way on the right side, this actually combines our move, rotate, and scale tool, and you can actually see all of them around our vehicle. So you can see the rotate tool around it. You can see the movement arrows. If you click on this gray box, you can scale your vehicle up and down. I don't want to do that though, so I'm just going to Control or Command Z to undo that all the way so it's back to normal size. So you can actually use this tool to control all the different aspects. Useful little tip to actually scroll through all of those. So if you actually just press the Q key on your keyboard, it'll select. Is if we go into do is you're going to rearrange some of our windows tabs that you see to clean up our project and make it a little bit more efficient for us. So in fact, for example, with our game view, if I left click on it and I drag it, it actually snaps out of the view that we're in. And I can put this wherever I really want. So I can put this underneath the scene, and then we can actually resize these windows. Or if I left click and drag the game again, I can drag it down to the bottom where our project window was and put it down there. So that's kind of cool. We can rearrange things however we want. Luckily, in Unity, we can actually just do all of these things with some preset options. So on the top right, all the way past the inspector, in the corner, you can see this little button that says default. So in fact, if I left click on that, and since I move things around, if I click on the default button again, it'll reset my entire editor experience to be back to what we had in the very beginning. And then if I click on the default option again, there's other options. So there's a 2x3, which is kind of cool. There's a for split. So this is kind of useful, especially if you're doing like a 2D game or something like that. There's a tall layout. And so this one puts our scene view and our game view side by side, which is kind of useful. We have a much larger view of what is happening. So I actually kind of like the tall view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rearrange some things a little bit. So I'm going to make our inspector just a bit smaller. So you see these lines between the windows. You can actually mouse over them. It turns into this little drag icon. And then you can click and drag. All right, so we've made it to the end of this lesson. As a recap, we've learned a lot of new functionality. So we got our first project set up and imported so that we can use all of the different assets available to us, like our obstacles or our vehicles. We learned how to position our objects. So in this case, we have our vehicle at the origin of our world, and then we moved our box just a little bit down the road here. And we also learned how to, so that we have a new concepts and skills, like creating a new project, setting up our, we learned how we can navigate to be able, we'll make this project really interactive by writing our obstacle in the scene. We'll see you in the next lesson.
So we're going to give this vehicle a little gas. And by the end of this lesson, the vehicle will drive down the road, crashing through the obstacles in its way. In Unity, fall. In Unity, all of the game objects in your scene are made up of components. And it's these components that determine how your game objects will look and behave in the scene. So if you want a game object to behave differently, you just need to change its components. Let's take our vehicle, for example. Right now, it doesn't have a lot of components. It just sits there doing nothing. In fact, it doesn't even obey the laws of gravity. If you raise it up in the air, it would just float there like a vehicle-shaped cloud. But if you add a particular component that tells it to obey gravity, it'll fall. What we need, though, is a custom component that will make this vehicle drive down the road. So, we are going to create that component by programming it from scratch in a new C# script. After we write the code that will move a game object forward, we'll apply that script component to our vehicle, and our vehicle will move forward. As you'll quickly find out, programming is very powerful. Just a single line of code will make that vehicle fly down the road. So to make all that happen, I'll see you in Unity.
Create our very first C button, organized to name. Well, this is actually something called a naming convention, and this is just a standard thing that develops the P and the C. And why are there no spaces? Well, this is actually something called a naming convention, and this is just a standard thing that developers do and people do when they're creating their projects as a way to make it easier for other people to jump into somebody else's project. So if somebody were to play around in your Unity project, they could understand the scripts and all the things that they're supposed to do and what they are. So capital letters for each word in a script makes it really easy for people to know that what you have is a script right there. Another reason to name scripts up front is because it can actually create a pretty large problem in Unity. So what I'm going to do is on my scripts folder, if I right click on it and I click create C# script, and I don't know what to name this script for now, so I'm just going to call it test. And so here you can see that the test script is created, and you can see that it's previewed over in the inspector. Now, say later down the line, I want this to do something. I don't know, maybe for some reason I want to make the obstacle fly or something like that. And then I press enter. So we've renamed this script to be obstacle fly, but in our inspector, you can see the preview of our script, it's still called test, even though we just changed it. So this could actually potentially break things in your project and create. There's a player controller script that's been that of your script. I'm going to just right click on obstacle fly, and I'm going to delete this from my scripts folder. Scripts, so we know that we're going to create a behavior for this vehicle. And then there's other things too, like mesh renderers and mesh colliders, both of which we'll get into later. A mesh renderer just helps to actually enable Unity to show you the vehicle with all of these textures applied onto it. And the collider will actually be something we use later so that we can have our vehicle run into our obstacle. Now, for example, if we went onto our obstacle and we accidentally added our player controller, which we can also do by left-clicking and dragging onto our inspector if the selected object is highlighted, we can add it that way, but I don't want the player controller on this obstacle, so I can click this gear icon next to it, and we can actually to environment. In your assets folder, you have it expanded, and then you open up your scripts folder by expanding it. And then if you double click on the player controller script, now you can see that my script has opened up in my IDE, which stands for an Integrated Development Environment. And basically, an IDE enables us to actually interact with our code and write lines of code and text inside of it. So you can actually see there's words that you would be very familiar with, like words like using and public and class. And so very similar to how you would write a note or write an essay in a text document, our IDEs enable us to actually write for our programs. So I'm just going to clean mine up a little bit. There's a whole bunch of information here that's not entirely necessary, so I'm actually going to go on my IDE, close this little Solution Explorer. I don't really need that. I don't need the Team Explorer either. I don't need the properties. Cool, so now I have a full screen. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. It's just a little hard to see. So on the bottom left, I have this little zoom option. So I'll set this to 200. It's pretty good. Now, my IDE is set to Visual Studio. That's actually the default that you would get downloaded on Unity. If not, you can always go to the website to go download Visual Studio from Microsoft. You might also notice that some of the colors are very different. Maybe you have a white background. That's just a setting of mine. I just turned my IDE familiar to you. Words like using, because it helps make it easier for me to see. So you can change those settings on your own, or if you're using a different IDE than Unity for the first time, you will download words like public and class. And a really helpful thing about an IDE is that in my case, it actually highlights certain words that are very important for a person and a computer to understand. So the different words that are actually highlighted in blue are standard keywords that your computer is made to understand. With our script itself, our player controller, you can see the name that we made before. And in fact, there's this weird colon icon. And so that icon actually means that this player controller inherits, in fact, there's this weird, with our script itself, our player controller, that are actually highlighted in blue, are standard keywords that your computer is made to understand. With our script itself, our player controller, you can see the name that we made before, and in fact, there's this weird colon icon. And so that icon actually means that this player controller inherits from another class called monobehavior. And monobehavior is actually a class that's applied to all the different objects that we create. So actually, if we made a script for our obstacle, it would also use things from monobehavior. And that's very helpful because in monobehavior, a lot of different things that we would need to write ourselves are already made in Unity. So it's really helpful and really easy to get started. For example, we have these two methods here, and you can tell they're methods because they have the word void, and then they have these parentheses, and then they have these curly brackets. So this usually tells you that this is a method statement, and here's actually where we can go write in some code if we wanted to. So start is a method that, as you can see, actually has a comment up here that is called before the first frame update. So when you press play on your game, it would call the start method. Versus the update method, another method from monobehavior. And update is called once per frame. So this is actually constantly checking in your game for different calculations it should make or different things that it should be checking against if you have a box that collides with something else or something like that. And the difference here you can see, so these two / marks actually create a comment, and your computer will not read what is on this line of code. So comments are for the purpose of a person to understand what they're reading inside of a method, versus the methods are actually the pieces of information that your computer needs to run certain tasks. So now, in our update method, we're going to write our very own comment. So make sure that you have your text selection inside of the update method. And then if you write / 2 / marks, we can say we'll move the vehicle. Then in your is you're going to double in the note for me. We've opened up our player controller script, and so now we can see all of this code that's inside of this script. And so we'll actually write our own line of code so that we can make the vehicle move forward from our little note we made for ourselves before. Make sure you pay attention before you do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our very first line of code here in our update method. So if I select this text block right after the word forward, if I press enter, so this creates a new line. So in programming, a blank space doesn't matter. Our computer just knows that there's nothing there. And what we're going to do is we're going to program using a programming language called C#. So everything that's done in Unity uses C#. If you're going to make a mobile application or if you're going to make a website, there are other languages that you can use to create those different kinds of applications. But for our game, we use C#. And C# is just one way that we're able to communicate directly with our computer using certain words that a computer is able to understand to do something that we want it to do. So in this case, we're going to write a line of code to move our vehicle. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to help visualize moving this vehicle down the road. So if I actually select the vehicle in my project hierarchy, so now you can see it's selected. If I left click on this blue arrow, I want to move the vehicle down the road. You can see down in the game screen. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. In fact, if you look in the inspector on the right side, as I'm moving this blue arrow in our transform component, you can see that the Z is actually updating. And so that gives us a really good hint of what we're trying to accomplish. So if you remember, our transform component was the thing that was updating as we moved that vehicle in the scene. In fact, we can actually use the transform component directly. So if I just type in transform, and in this case, lowercase versus capital case T is extremely important. They're two very different things. The transform is actually an entire class, very similar to our player controller class that has even more methods inside of it. A lowercase t means we're getting the transform component of our current object. In this case, it's going to be our vehicle. So now that we're getting our vehicle's transform, what we actually want to do is we want to move that vehicle in that Z direction. So we can use a method using a dot. So a dot will help us get methods out of our different classes and objects. So dot translate. And so you can see here this is a capital T because this is a method just like our update method. And so what is happening here is we're telling our computer we want it to do a specific instruction using this translate method. We want to translate the position, we want to change the position of our vehicle using its transform property. Now, to tell the computer that we're trying to make it do a task, we need to use these parentheses. And a really handy thing that my IDE does, it is actually suggests different things that I can do and can autocomplete certain statements that I make if I'm trying to write code or if I'm trying to use a method. In this case, it's suggesting different things I can do with our transform.translate. So this here you can see inside of translate, there's a vector3 translation. So this is a parameter. This is a piece of information that I tell the computer to use to be able to do the thing that I want it to do. Now, I don't necessarily know what a vector3 is right now. So let's see if there's other options. You can see there's 6 total options. And this one seems to be really useful. So this one actually says that it will move the transform. It'll change that position by the X, by the Y, and by the Z. If you remember, I was trying to move my vehicle on the Z. So what I can do is I don't want my vehicle to move in the X direction. I don't want it to move left or right, so I'll just type in 0. I don't want my vehicle to move up or down. It's not a plane or a spaceship, so that's also 0. But I do want to move it in the Z direction, so I'm going to make that 1. Now that we've added our parameters to our method and we have that closed parentheses, we actually now need to add a semicolon. And so the semicolon actually tells your script that the method is now complete. So you can think of how we use periods to end our sentences and close our statements. When you're programming in C#, you use a semicolon at the end of your method to tell the script that this is the end of this line. So now what this will do is update is called 50 to 60 times every second. So in a second, our vehicle will move 60 units, 60 meters in a certain direction. So now if I test this in Unity, when I press play, I should see nothing. Okay, that's not what we wanted to happen. Let's see. Get out of play mode. What did I do wrong? So let me just player controller. Oh, Control or Command F. So we've written our first player controller script form dot translate, and then you're going to use an open parentheses, type a 0, comma 0, comma 1, close parentheses, and then semicolon. Now it's your turn. Our vehicle now moves virtually at the speed of light, just flies straight down our screen. So that's good. We've got the movement in. Now I just want to highlight some things with coding to make our lives a little bit easier. So with our player controller script open in our IDE, my IDE does some really useful things to make my life a lot easier. So one of the big things first is if I start typing a word, say transform, it automatically tries to suggest the word that I'm trying to type, in this case transform, and I can press enter, and it'll complete that word for me. Now, if I type dot or period or full stop, you'll see that my IDE suggests all of these different words. And a lot of these words, especially if they have this little purple icon next to it, these are all actually other methods that I can use, just like our translate method. Now you might hear people say methods or functions in Unity and in C#. They're essentially the same thing, but a lot of people just tend to call things methods when you're using these kinds of statements here that have parentheses. Now, you can think of all of these different words very similar to how you would think of a dictionary. And so a dictionary helps you understand a word that you're looking for. In this case, in programming, this is called documentation. And so our documentation, or our dictionary, tells us all of the different words, all of the different actions that we can perform with our transform component here. So I'll use translate again. And now, if we push that dictionary analogy even further, so we have the word translate. And if I use an open parentheses, you'll see that now my IDE suggests different parameters, different pieces of information that I can words, different ways that you can essentially do the same thing. So in this case, it's asking for a vector3 tree. And here now you can actually see we actually have a suggestion as to what a vector3 is, which is super helpful. So my IDE tells me that a vector3 is a representation of 3D vectors and points. What does that mean? Well, in fact, that 0, 0, 1 is just 3 dimensions of points, 3 different points that we use, a 0, and a 1. In fact, that 0, and that 1 all correlate to the position on our transform component. So we have the 0 on the x, the 0 on the y, and then our 1 is actually the z updating over time. We even have these vectors, these 3D points, in our obstacle with our position. You can see the 0, 0, and the 25. That's a vector 3. That's 3 different points that we're storing. So with that information, it's very helpful because we can actually just shorthand this bit of code that we wrote with 0, 0, 1. In fact, if we use dot and then forward, you can see that forward is actually just shorthand for writing 0, 0, 1. So that actually, can save us a lot of time, and especially is very helpful to making our code easier to understand. Because if I told a person to in programming code, now changed for code did exactly, you're going to change your now. We've fixed our vehicle, so now it flies down the screen once again, extremely fast. At least our code is a bit more readable, but now we need to you might get 60 frames in 1 second. So first what we're going to do is we're going to want to change the way that we move our vehicles. So currently the way this works is our update method is called every single frame, but depending on how powerful your computer is, you might get 20 frames in 1 second, you might get 60 frames in 1 second, and so really your player could move at varying speeds depending on your to use for from updating every frame to updating over time every second. So the way that we do that first is by multiplying. And for a computer, you should use the star symbol. So if you press Shift on your 8 key, it'll create that X. Then what we'll actually do is you press X and use the X key. It considers that an actual letter themselves. So now we're using, so that is called time with a capital T, and you can even see it highlights it in green. That way we know that this was a pre-made class. So now we're using time to keep track of our time, and we actually use delta time to get the change in time between all of our different frames. So now, using this bit of code, we can actually know when 1 second has actually elapsed versus 20 frames happening, 60 frames happening. Who knows? We can't control that. We can control how much time is actually passing. So if we go test this, we press updates the script, and that's not what I wanted to happen. I forgot to save again. Okay, so back in the player controller, just make sure you save Control or Command S. That way it always updates the script in Unity. So now, when I press play, we should see our vehicle moving, albeit very slowly, but because of that little bit of code we added, we're actually now moving 1 meter a second. You can see, if you want to time it, it would probably be just about 1 unit every single second. So cool, now we have our vehicle moving by time. Granted, it's moving very slow, but we can fix that pretty easily. So what we're going to do in our player controller, a fun little tidbit, the way that this formula actually works, this little equation that we have. So in fact, vector3.forward is storing a 0, a 0, and a 1. And so when you're actually multiplying it by the time and by 20, you're actually multiplying each of the different values. So first you multiply your 0 by time and by 20, which will always be 0. Then you multiply your y, which is 0, by time and 20, which is still 0. And then you multiply the z by time and by 20, which gets you 20 meters a second. So just a fun way, times 1 is, you press changing, and that people will commonly use for physics, we actually need to add something to both our obstacle and our vehicle. Interact with this truck here that we have as if it can actually click on the little arrows next to all of the component names, and it will compress down each of the different options. You can see our obstacle and press fly straight through because it's not get interesting. So we'll make our obstacle, our little crate, maybe about 20 kilograms or so. See, so took in. So now this has even more weight. Now we're going to make this road just a little bit more treacherous, make our game a bit more difficult for our player by adding some more boxes. Make sure you pay attention before you do. What we do is we're actually going to select the obstacle, and I'm just going to make this a little bit easier for myself. So I'm going to left click and drag the obstacle in our hierarchy and drag it all the way to the bottom of this list. Now what I want to do, so Control key on our obstacle, so Control click on my second obstacle. Now Alt, and we're going to win my first obstacle. And in fact, if I just hover over when I press play, so we've made to take your first obstacle, you're going to use click on your second. Obstacle a long time. So, and you can see our obstacle. Press F to focus. Blue line underneath all of the more boxes. Our obstacle. We'll try and get it to around 50 or so. So we've made it to the end of this little lesson. To wrap everything up, we've added some really good functionality to our game now. So when I press play, see the vehicle drives down the road. It doesn't move in incredibly fast. It moves out of physics. Because the vehicle has physics, it just drives straight off the road, which is totally okay. Be free vehicle. We also learned a lot about coding in this little bit about the structure. Created our very first C# script, learned a little bit about the structure of how scripts and classes work. We learned about comments, even made a few of our own, learned about methods. We wrote our very first line of code and called our first method to be able to move the vehicle forward. So now we know how to use methods. We've learned a bit about parameters and how we can pass computer the information that we need to do something. We even climb and on our vehicle rigid body. So now we enter code to our vehicle. We'll see you there.